about that. Nobody ever asks you if you want to be part of war. That's it. It just happens, and it's horrible. The fact that you didn't choose it, and the fact that you can't do anything about it, and the fact that you probably cannot escape, because reflecting on last year's war, so we would get these last minute messages either in the form of telephone calls. Usually they were in the form of telephone calls, and they would tell you have 5 minutes to evacuate. 5 minutes. And of course, we all have these emergency bags. So what can you take in a small bag? So probably, I don't know, your passport, some money, whatever you can carry in a small bag. And then, war plays tricks on your mind, because I remember hearing people who would say, wow, it's so nice of them because they're letting us know. You see, that's what war does.
Terrorizing you. That's not letting you know, that's terrorizing.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just it shifts. I think something happens. It shifts your perspective. You start to think in a different way.
Hello and welcome to the 5th episode of the Other Armenias podcast. I'm your co-host, Milena Abrahamian.
And I'm your other co-host, Tamar Shirinyan.
So before we start with today's episode, we want to ask you all to please like, comment, and subscribe so that you can get more, so you can have an idea of when coming episodes are coming. And it's also really nice for us to get comments, because then we kind of start to think about how we can adjust and improve how we're doing this. So, and it's also a great way to engage. If you like what you see, we like hearing compliments. So today, so Tamar is going to introduce Nayiri.
Yeah, so today we have the great pleasure of having with us Nayiri Baboudjian Bouchakjian, who is a writer and educator based in Beirut, where she teaches English language and literature at the Lebanese American University. Nayiri is a Pushcart Prize nominee, and her work has appeared in publications such as Cornerstone, Hybrid Magazine, the Journal of Radical Wonder, and Rusted Radishes. More recently, her article, The Man in the Mirror, Reflections on Dementia Caregiving, was published in Life Writing. And more recently than that, her article, Teaching in the Times of Genocide, was published in Pangyris magazine. Nayiri is currently working on her memoir, exploring themes of grief, caregiving, and homeland set against the backdrop of multiple traumas. So we are very happy to have gotten to read some of Nayiri's work and also have her on here for an interview.
Hello, hi Tamar, and hi Milena. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's great to share this space with you. I'm really excited for the conversations, the dialogues that we're going to have. So,
Hey, Milena, do you want to start us off?
Sure. I just want to let our readers know that, it's not like really a surprise, just so that you know that today's format is an interview, but also a very special one, because Nayiri is also going to read from her writing, in addition to sort of having this conversation with us with each question. So let's start with the first question that we have for you. So what is it like to live in Lebanon for Armenians now?
Okay, so as you said, I'm going to start by reading parts of my writing. And I'm actually quite grateful for this podcast because it gave me the opportunity and the space to go back to my writing. So some things that I had written like 5 years ago, 6 years ago, and to kind of see what I can say about living in Lebanon as an Armenian or just living in Lebanon as any other citizen. So I'm going to read a part of something that I wrote a few years back in 2021. So this was 1 year after the Beirut port explosions. And this piece, it was the one that you mentioned, it was published in Cornerstone, Sabil. So it's the title is Moments Like August 4th. So Beirut is a city of contradictions, all types of contradictions, war zones, and peaceful ones, rebels and party supporters, dirty alleys and cleaner neighborhoods, old dilapidated buildings next to luxurious ones and new towers, painful losses and then painful rebirths. My husband and I have been discussing moving to Armenia. So this was then, and we're still discussing this. He's somehow convinced that a better life awaits us there. So many of our friends and even family members have moved back to Armenia. Repatriation, they call it, repats, heading back home. He convinces me on a daily basis. I'm guilty of not feeling it as strongly as he is, guilty of feeling that Lebanon is still my home, guilty of feeling a powerful and unshakable connection to a country that does not welcome me a lot of the times. After all, I could only wish for a Lebanese passport. My father is Syrian Armenian, and so naturally, I'm also Syrian Armenian. Of course, I was born in Beirut. Of course, my mother is Lebanese. Of course, I never lived in Syria, except for some summers spent in my grandfather's village in Kasab. Living in Lebanon with a Syrian nationality has been a struggle throughout. Growing up in Lebanon, I have witnessed how women have minimal rights, how a messed up patriarchy has managed to play the quota card to make sure women cannot pass on their nationality to their children. I remember when I was growing up, my Syrianness was not public knowledge. Nobody needed to know. I hid my Syrian identity even from my closest friends. When some of my friends found out, I was bullied about it, bullied gently, harshly, jokingly, privately. Being Syrian meant different things to different people, ranging from being an outsider to being a traitor and one not worthy of living in Lebanon. Therefore, I hid my paper identity even more carefully, only shared it when necessary for work or paperwork. I did not mind being Syrian in private, except that deep down inside, I was also guilty of not truly feeling Syrian. I loved a city that did not welcome me in its dust and pollution. I was in love with a city that, even despite its unbearable August heat, had something inextricably magnetic about it and toxic. Beirut. You want to leave, but something holds you back. You cannot leave. You leave and you carry Beirut in your heart. You are heartbroken. You live with garod, yearning in Armenian, and want to come back. I explained to my husband that my Armenianness is even more rooted in Lebanon than in Armenia, which is not to negate that what I feel for Armenia. I miss Armenia. I miss reading road signs in Armenian, restaurant names in Armenian. I miss the art, my cousins, the music, and the intellect. And I know that one day I may feel comfortable in its folds. Just two more excerpts, I promise. These are shorter ones about Lebanon. So this one is from The Luxury of Pine Nuts. Truth varies during wars. 30 years after the supposed end of the Civil War, as a nation, we are even deprived of the momentary amnesia and fake serenity that Xanax and Lexotanil can provide. The pharmacies are now out of not only Lexotanil and Xanax, Prozac, but also aspirin and Panadol. And one last excerpt from Lost in Corridors and Sunsets. When the Lebanese war became unbearable, civil war. So this is something that I wrote about, like how it was growing up in the 80s. We were imprisoned at home long before COVID lockdowns. So my sister decided it was time to have a publication, and we called it Cactus. It's like war, she explained to me. It hurts when you try to hold it, but there's some kind of twisted beauty in it. So yeah, I'll I'll stop there with these bits and pieces about Lebanon. And I think it's interesting that I chose something about my identity because, you know, that's the never-ending question. Who am I? Am I Armenian? Am I Syrian? Am I Lebanese? Am I Arab? What am I? So, yeah, so to go back to your question, what is it like to live in Lebanon for Armenians now? I think for anyone who's living in Lebanon now, to say the least, it's very challenging. Like I'm sugarcoating it now. So it's quite challenging, and it's I'll talk about the positive part in a bit because there is a positive part. But you know, things like hyperinflation, you know, sometimes you really have to count the zeros to understand, to think, oh, these are in millions. So, you know, millions, you can carry millions with you in your wallet or in your bag, but these millions are worthless. In terms of, you know, the Armenian community, unfortunately, it's been shrinking. I tried to get numbers, but I'm not sure how many Armenians actually do live in Lebanon right now. I know many left, and I'm speaking about the past 5 years. I'm not speaking about 2010 to 2005, but I'm speaking about just 5 years. Many people immigrated. Some went to the US, Canada,
Armenia.
yeah, Armenia, exactly. Europe and Armenia. So this was the repat, you know, like the new Nerkacht, if you want. A lot of people, you know, so many of my family members, my cousins, my friends, my best friend moved to Armenia 3 years ago. And yeah, and so it makes me wonder about these different layers of othernesses. I don't know what it's called, otherness, just being the other. So my friend tells me that now she kind of feels like she's the other in Armenia because she is the Aremadahai who is viewed as, you know, somewhat of an outsider in a way. Um, yeah, where was I? Okay, we were talking about Lebanese Armenians. You know, it's very sad. You see a lot of shops have closed down. A lot of these small, interestingly Armenian shops like artisans, etc., they just can't tolerate with, you know, they can't keep up with the expenses. The inflation is just too much. The thing about inflation is whatever you do, it's never enough. You know, you make $2,000, it's not enough. You make $3,000, it's not enough. It's just it's very, very difficult to keep up with it. So a lot of Armenians are just, also a lot of non-Armenians, a lot of Lebanese. I just met this very nice lady today, and she was telling me about how she lost her shop, everything that she owned in Hadath area, which is very close to the area that was targeted by Israel last year. So she was telling me how she lost everything. She lost her home, she lost her shop, and now she rented a shop up the road. She wants to start anew. So there are so many other people like her who just somehow thought, you know what, I don't want to do this again. I've probably done this once or twice, and I don't want to go through it again, because what's my guarantee if I go ahead and the R word that I don't like, resilience, I'll talk about it in a bit. So if I just build another home, another shop, I buy a piece of land and I just go ahead with it. There is no guarantee. This may happen in 3 years' time, 2 years' time, 6 months' time, and I'll be devastated again. So I think these are the reasons: the hyperinflation, of course, the Beirut port blast, the war. It's just never ending. The wars. So there are like layers and layers of traumas that Lebanese and Lebanese Armenians have to deal with. Do you want me to share the good news or like the good part of all of this?
Of course.
Okay. So the good part is, despite everything that's been happening, I don't know if it's a combination of being Armenian and Lebanese. So you've got that stubborn, beautiful, stubborn people with beautifully resilient people. Like that combination. There are plays, so there are theatrical productions in Armenian, of course, in Arabic also, but since we're zooming in on the Armenian community, theatrical productions, music productions, dance groups. Vahe Berberian is coming in I think in a month's time, so we're very happy about that. So church events, church bazaars, school events, all of these. And, sometimes people ask me, how does that happen? How do you just plan and go ahead with these events? I think it's the R word, the resilience. Sometimes it's a curse and sometimes it's a blessing, but I think sometimes it's a curse. I was having this discussion with one of my students and she was telling me that she doesn't think it's resilience. She thinks it's being delusional. So yeah, that's what it is, being Armenian in Lebanon in a nutshell.
Yeah, there's a lot of contradiction there.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I started to think about, and I'm also I was born in Beirut, I shared with you, and my mother was born in Syria, and so I also never became Lebanese, although I left really early. And you talk in that art in that essay that you wrote in Cornerstone, you talk about hiding your Syrian identity, which is what you refer to as a paper identity. And it's kind of like you write, being Syrian meant different things to different people, ranging from being an outsider to being a traitor and one not worthy of living in Lebanon. Can you talk a little bit about what that means? I was kind of curious as to, and why being Syrian is seen as being a traitor. I mean, being an outsider is one thing, but being a traitor, can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, of course. I think what I meant is, so it means different things to different people at different times. So before 2005, Syria was in Lebanon. So literally speaking, there were Syrian checkpoints. We used to go to Anjar, which is basically populated by Armenians. Well, now it used to be 100% Armenians, now not 100% probably, but in Anjar there were many also Syrian checkpoints. There was a Syrian army there. So I think the fact that politically the relationship between Lebanon and Syria was definitely not at its best. It was like a roller coaster ride. I think that was part of it. So if you were Syrian, you were associated with, the regime. automatically that you may agree with certain things in the regime, etc. I mean, a lot of the times people didn't say this outright, but it was there in, the stereotyping, discrimination, etc. After 2005, it was a little bit different because Syria technically was out of Lebanon. So there came this sense of liberation. At one point, it was demonizing Syria. And then at another point, it was like, okay, thank God we've gotten rid of, the Syrian army, of course. And then after that, interestingly enough, when the Syrian war started, all of a sudden people were very sympathetic and welcoming, and because what can they do? They are subjected to a lot of misery, a lot of violence, etc. So that's what I meant. It changed and throughout, and even until now, with the latest developments, the toppling of the regime, etc. So now some people are sympathetic because finally this one person that, probably was responsible for a lot of what was happening in Syria and Lebanon is gone. And there's like a collective relief. So yeah, so I think it changed. When I was in school, I wasn't very vocal about my my paper identity. And I did, as I say in that story, I did feel at some point that, why is it that I don't feel Syrian? Like, is it okay for me not to feel Syrian? Even though I always felt this connection to Kasab, but it wasn't, I just felt the connection to that specific part of Syria. So I'm not sure why. I mean, I'm still trying to discover that, but yeah.
And if I could ask something else here,
Yeah, of course.
this idea, which is kind of related to what you just said, this in the excerpt that you read, the living with garot, living with yearning, that you have, that you just noted that you never felt for Syria, but you felt for Kasab, and in another piece of your writing, you talk about, in a more recent piece that I think hasn't been published, you write
Yeah, that's the latest one, actually, the one about mulberries and grapes. Yeah.
and and just like a kind of nod to the title of our podcast, Other Armenias.
Yes.
Right. And I think this speaks so well to, what Milena and I were kind of, conceptualizing from the beginning and talking about this podcast, in the sense that your yearning, your yearning is for Armenia, like in all of its forms and in all of the places that it exists, and it exists differently in all of these places, from Kesab to Beirut to Lebanon writ large to Armenia, and the way in which that yearning almost like has an object, but it doesn't quite have an object, that it is kind of diffuse in all of the ways in which Armenia really is diffuse across all of these borders and boundaries. And it also made me think about how all of these Armenias are, places of so much violence, right? That sometimes, and loss, yeah, often about Armenia, but often completely not about Armenia at all, right? The August 4th explosion in Beirut, and the war in Syria, and more recently attacks on Latakia
Yeah.
in Syria and the ethnic, violence, it's a genocide that's going on there.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Yeah. I love the word garod. I think even when I say it in English, like yearning, I don't know, maybe it's like a combination of yearning, longing, just a lot of love. But as Milena said, there's a sense of loss. And I think as Armenians, we're born with just some kind of malaise. We're always grieving. We get it, it's probably that intergenerational trauma. So we're always just you miss someone, right? You miss something. You miss a home that's not there. You miss a lover that's gone. You miss I don't know. It's just this feeling that something is not enough. Something is not complete. And definitely, I think a lot of Palestinians, by the way, who had to leave their homes, they took the keys. I know some of my friends, their grandparents still have the key to the house. I mean, house, their home probably does not exist, but they've still kept that as, you know, if anything, as a sign of resistance. So I think it's very similar. We miss a homeland that's not there. I remember the very first time I went to Armenia in the late 90s. I loved it. So many things about Armenia, just, the fact that I can just speak Armenian, the fact that I got to meet so many cousins that I didn't know existed, because my grandparents, sisters and brothers, 7 of them went back to Armenia during the Nerkacht in 1948. So I met that part of the family. But there was something like, is this the homeland that I grew up thinking? Like whenever I would read poems about Ararat, whenever I would read poems, and then just that bipolarity, this is it, but this is not it. There's something missing. What about where my grandma came from? What about where my grandpa came from? Do you know what I mean? So just um so many of that emotions. Yeah, and I think Garod is that. I love that. I think just I think this is something that Milena mentioned or you mentioned in the first podcast. Just all of these are different Armenias. Just, I don't know what happens when we put them together. Maybe some very some very interesting combination. Yeah. So I think Garod is something that we carry within us, wherever we go. Like if one day we do actually move to Armenia, I think it would be Garod towards Lebanon, towards Kasab, towards and I think my attachment to Kasab actually also has that historical significance, because I know that my grandfather's family and my grandmother's family, they actually took part in the deportation. So they were forced to leave Kasab and they went all the way to Deir Zor, to even Jordan. And then when they came back, they started literally from scratch, like from zero. So I think it carries a lot of power in that sense, a lot of resistance. Yeah. I think it makes a great name, by the way, Garod. Also, yeah.
So for me, I mean, like the core thing behind this word garot, I mean, we can say yearning, we can say something missing. It's really about loss for me, like the way that I understand it, and then trying to sort of find a way to compensate for that loss, or however you want to call it. But I think loss is quite a theme when we look at all these different Armenias that, you can look at. And one of those, Armenias, would be Nagorno-Karabakh, people from Nagorno-Karabakh, this land where Armenians have lived historically, and not only Armenians. So the question of, well, now they're no longer living there, and as they've been displaced, like the entire population, the entire Armenian population has been displaced in 2023. But this is not something that is, I guess, it's like something that is not new, I guess, for Armenians in the region in general. I'm also thinking about Nakhichevan, for example. And again, not to say, like, I really hate these arguments of like, oh, we were here first, this is historically Armenian. Like, to me, that's kind of ridiculous. You know, to me, we've always shared land and we've always belonged to these lands along with other people who belonged and belong to these lands. It's just been really about empires that have had their different agendas. And so, you know, it's been easy to sort of see different groups of people as people who can move this way and that way, that you can move, that you can, you know, subject to this kind of violence. And so the question that I have for you is, how do you connect with what's happening in Lebanon to Gaza and to Karabakh? Otherwise, no, like people also use the word Artsakh. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to read something that I wrote 2 years ago, and this was for a competition organized by Yala with the University of Oxford. So I wrote a piece and it's called "The Ships Are Coming." And it's just describing a balcony scene. It's my neighbor and myself having coffee on the balcony. So very typically, I guess, Armenian, Lebanese, Mediterranean. So here it goes. The abat-jours are so red and vibrant. The flies line up on them, and from afar, they look like watermelons. Someone is always waiting in line in this city for bread, for water, fuel, gas, medication. My neighbor Susu joins me today on our balcony for subhiyya. Subhiyya is morning time. That's, I mean, in Arabic, it literally means morning bonding time, and it's usually for women and by women and to women. So I make a huge jazva of Lebanese coffee. I want us to have seconds. We can still afford to drink coffee. Susu has been working on an exit plan, Melbourne. We have also been working on ours, possibly Armenia. Every day, we sadly witness bits and pieces of Lebanon shaken by mass exodus and brain drain. Sorry, the ships carrying fuel have left their destination. Once they arrive, anticipations of war will escalate. I offer Susu jam from Artsakh. Most other items have gone bad in our fridge. The beautiful people of Artsakh sent us this gift last August after the Beirut port explosions. The tastiest jam of baby plums. You are lucky. At least you have a homeland, she says, as I narrate to her about the war that happened in Artsakh last September. We spread the mauve jam on small pieces of toast and enjoy the aftertaste. I wonder what happened to the women who actually prepared this jam. You know, she says almost jokingly, this world lacks good neighbors. Good neighbors like us who accept each other are much needed in Armenia and in Lebanon. For over 50 years, our families, the Haddads and the Baboudjians, who come from different backgrounds, have lived next to each other, celebrated together, and also grieved together. So now I'm going to read from my most recent piece, the one that's still not published, The Power of Mulberries and Grapes. And this was about, our trip to Kasab last year. So August 2024. In hopes of finding an explanation, or even better, a negation of human cruelty, paired with a desperation of all the genocides happening in the world, I picked up the courage to go to Kasab, Just a year ago, in September 2023, Armenians were forcefully driven out and displaced from their ancestral home of Nagorno-Karabakh or Artsakh. The whole world watched one of the horrific death marches implemented by the Azeri government. Some even cheered. The perpetrators then moved on to Gaza. The world watched again and is still silently watching another televised genocide, the Artsakhification of Gaza, magnified by hundreds, soon to turn into the Gazafication of Lebanon, but that had to wait until we were back in Beirut. So, yeah. I think it's a very interesting question. How do we connect what's happening in Gaza to Lebanon, to Artsakh? I really like what you said, Milena, about, just demonizing or blaming one person or one government. I think I'm against violence in all its forms, conducted by the Azeri government, the Armenian government, any government. I'm against violence. And this is coming from a person who has suffered the effects, after effects, pre-effects, post-effects, all effects of war, post-traumatic stress disorder. I mean, unfortunately, in Lebanon, we always joke about this here. We say it's not even post because we're never post. The minute we're about to be post, there's another trauma. So we're always in that state of just, it's traumatic. It's traumatic stress disorder. So I think in many ways, Armenians and Palestinians, they sympathize with each other because there are some similarities. We understand the pain. We understand, as you said, we understand the pain of loss. And I have many Palestinian friends in Lebanon and also abroad. And this is something that we talk about a lot. And I ask them and they ask me and we ask each other, will you ever go back to Palestine? Will you ever go back? So let's say, there is some kind of solution, some kind of peace treaty tomorrow. Will you ever go back to Palestine? One of my very good friends said that she may not, but she will have the choice. She will be the one who decides whether she goes back and lives in Palestine or does not. So that feeling of forced migration, of just carrying the weight of your identity in exile, I think in that sense, there are so many similarities. And also the fact that, we've been fed with this narrative that, what, your grief doesn't matter. It's okay. Your grief, oh, it's all right. You'll get over it. Doesn't really matter. And I really don't, I cannot accept something like that. I cannot accept, these interviews that we watched, endless interviews on TV during the war last year. I'm referring to the war that directly affected Lebanon, and people would ask, so do you justify what Hamas is doing to Israel? So this narrative that, our history is denied over and over again, our trauma is politicized, and that's okay. We just have to accept all of these things. In terms of similarities between what's happening in Lebanon, Gaza, and Artsakh, I think there are some things, of course, some things that are uniquely Palestinian, some things that are uniquely Lebanese, and then, some things that are just for Artsakh. But unfortunately, in all, there's forced displacement. There's this intention of cultural erasure. And also this language that dehumanizes people. I think we saw it a lot during the war. We still witness it. Just read any media coverage of Gaza and the way Palestinians are referred to, you know, sometimes as animals, as humans minus. So this is a narrative that was unfortunately used for Lebanon also. So, I mean, even if this was targeted towards Hezbollah fighters, so we're not all Hezbollah fighters, but then sometimes we were all treated as Hezbollah fighters. So I don't know how I got to this point, but yeah.
Can I just say something
yeah.
about when you were saying that you're against violence? Just wanted to say this point that for me, it's really like when I try to define for myself what is violence, there's always this element of choicelessness in it. Like when there's a violence happening to me, it's the violence of it is besides like the harm, let's say physical, mental, whatever cost, spiritual cost.
It's like you didn't choose it. Yeah,
exactly. So this is for me, like when I say I'm against violence, like that's what I mean. And then what, like there's another thing for me with regards to how I might respond to something, which I would call something other than violence. Just wanted to point that, I don't know if it makes sense, like how I'm trying to frame it.
Totally. And that's something that I felt. I mean, a lot of times I felt that during the wars, I felt that this was not my choice. Like nobody actually came to me and said, "Oh, Nayiri, what do you think? You know, should we do this? Should we not do this? Let's, I'm so used to being the teacher. So I ask my students, what do you think? Like we could have the exam on Tuesday, but it is also possible to have it on Wednesday. So what do you think about that? Nobody ever asks you if you want to be part of war. That's it. It just happens, and it's horrible. The fact that you didn't choose it, and the fact that you can't do anything about it, and the fact that you probably cannot escape, because reflecting on last year's war, so we would get these last-minute messages, either in the form of telephone calls. Usually they were in the form of telephone calls, and they would tell you have 5 minutes to evacuate. 5 minutes. And of course, we all have these emergency bags. So what can you take in a small bag? So probably, I don't know, your passport, some money, whatever you can carry in a small bag. And then, war plays tricks on your mind, because I remember hearing people who would say, wow, it's so nice of them because they're letting us know. You see, that's what war does.
Terrorizing you. That's not letting you know, that's terrorizing.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just it shifts. I think something happens. It shifts your perspective. You start to think in a different way. Even you look at the person who is abusing you and you start to think, wow, thank you for letting me know. So it just messes you up in so many ways. But yeah, I wanted to mention one thing about Artsakh and Lebanon and Gaza, and that's just following maybe like a systematic, okay, let's starve the population. So in the form of blockade, we didn't have, in Lebanon less so, but in Gaza and in Artsakh, definitely. So we starve the population, we deprive them of their rights, we destroy the infrastructure. And of course, what we try to do, preferably, is get rid of / kill the influential people, i.e. the journalists. We all know what happened to some of the most prominent journalists in Gaza, I mean, this was long before the war also. So, you know, it's been happening for the past 60, 70 years. So after you starve a population, you make sure they don't have access to food. We struggle with water, electricity, you know, basic human things. So they're busy worrying about these things. And then, you know, it's so much easier to attack, displace. So, I mean, this is what happened. I think, you know, April 24th is in a week's time. And this is what happened on April 24th, 1915. Armenian intellectuals were murdered. So when you kill the leaders, what happens to people? So I used to naively, very, very naively, I used to truly, really, honestly believe that had the Armenian genocide happened now, it would not have happened. Because now we have social media. And then, you know, I would read all these statements, you know, these Germans who were there and who reported, they documented, but nothing really happened. So I was truly convinced that no genocide can happen now, no genocide of this magnitude. And this depth of indifference, of human cruelty. But, you know, I was naive. I was very naive, and I was wrong, because everything is televised. Everything is out there. People are sharing posts, and it's not that people are silent about it. It's that people are cheering. You know, they're cheering the perpetrators. They're cheering the people who are killing these innocent civilians. And we know that in Gaza and in Lebanon, not every single person is a Hamas fighter. That's a different argument. You know, what do we do with Hamas fighters, with Hezbollah fighters? But in a way, they had the choice, as you said. So they kind of made that choice. But these civilians, they have nothing to do with the war, but they're being targeted every single day. I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, thank you for all of that. There's so much that I want to say, and also so much that I want to ask, but I'll stick to this one thing that you write about. And it's from the section of that short piece that you read from the ships. The ships are coming, and there, you know, that line that you just read. This world lacks good neighbors, she says, almost jokingly. Good neighbors like us who accept each other are much needed in Armenia and in Lebanon. And here, you know, your neighbor is talking about your two families, the Baboudjians and the Haddads, who, you know, have lived as neighbors for so long. And it makes me think about like how you're pointing there to one of these other connections, which is that in both in both the context of Lebanon, which became like another scene of the genocide in Gaza, and, you know, what's been happening in Nagorno-Karabakh since, I mean, even perhaps we might say the 1910s, is really like, you know, somehow that good neighborliness, right? Which has been, you know, Milena noted this earlier, that, you know, these are all peoples who have been living amongst and together with one another like for so long, right? Armenians, you know, amongst Arabs and amongst Turks and Assyrians and Greeks, and, you know, within the Ottoman Empire and also afterwards, and in the Russian Empire, and and also, I mean, here I want to note that, the fact that, Jewish people also lived amongst many others, right, in Europe for centuries, right? And somehow, right, of course, here we can point to European fascism, but that good neighborliness, right? That really, I mean, I'm not trying to romanticize the past, but there is this like neighborly connection, and here characterized by your two families. But then you also pointed out in that excerpt that you read from The Power of Mulberries and Grapes, that your unpublished essay, where you started off that piece, and I know, listeners, you don't have access to this piece yet, but I hope that you will very soon. But you start off with the indifference of people, right? Like we live in a tragic world where people are indifferent to each other's suffering, and this is across borders and boundaries, but also maybe even neighbors, friends, strangers, right? We don't have that good neighborliness that we are actually suffering from in the world. And you end the piece, so and you weave this throughout, like first by your niece, who is a young girl, who is picking the mulberries, and not eating them, and actually just giving them to you. And after a while, you notice that she's giving all the mulberries to you, and then you start picking the mulberries and giving them to her, and she says, "No, I don't want them. I'm picking them for you because I'm here all the time, and I get to pick from these trees all the time, and I know how much you like them," right? That the exhibition of like that good neighborliness, right, that you're seeing in this young girl. And then at the end, the good neighborliness, again, I'm using that term, and I'm interested in hearing more from you about this. But at the end, after you go to the church for the blessing of the grapes, and you had to leave because, again, that little girl needed to go to the bathroom, and so as good adult neighbors, you take her to the bathroom, and you miss the grapes, and you don't get any grapes. And this elderly woman, who I gather is also healing from cancer, and she asks you if you want her grapes, and you say, "No, thank you. We appreciate it, but we no, thank you." And she leaves them and walks away, and she doesn't even ask, right? And she doesn't ask again. She just leaves them and walks away. And and that kind of, right, we might not see it in states, right? We are very much lacking it in states, but that human to human, like next door neighbor, good neighborliness that provides for that lack of indifference and that kindness and that gentleness.
Yeah, absolutely. I really, really, truly believe in the power of one individual, just one individual. And with the case of my niece, I mean, that was the first time that I actually meet her. So, because, the situation in Kasab hasn't been ideal. So we hadn't been there for quite some time. And it's not that I was shocked, but I was truly deeply touched by her, her generosity, and just, I mean, just saying that it's okay, you can have the mulberries. It's okay. Like, I'm here all the time. The tree is here. And before that, she was telling me how she takes good care of the tree, etc. So just this willingness to share what you have. And I think that's something that happens during war times. I don't know if it only happens during war times, but I've witnessed it in Lebanon, that willingness of people to help, to go out of their comfort zone. I mean, last year there were many, many Lebanese people who left their homes, and then voluntarily, I mean, and they were cooking for families who had been displaced and sharing whatever they had, of course, with the help of NGOs. But I think that's very important, that human connection that we all have. Um, Sometimes I think at the end of the day, maybe it's just these power hungry leaders at times, who just maybe they want to sell their weaponry and so they play at politics, Azerbaijan buying from Israel and Israel selling off, I don't know what. Um, yeah, good neighbors. They're really hard to find. Really, really very hard to find. But when you have one, you have to take care of them. So you kind of have to nurture this relationship. It doesn't just happen. There's a lot of give and take in being a good neighbor. So yeah.
So, in your work, I mean, every time I read your work, and even now during this podcast, when you were reading, I found myself becoming so emotional. I don't know what it is about your work. It's probably just really good, and that's why. But I think that there's a lot of really good work that doesn't do that to me, and your work really does that to me. It just makes me very emotional, and it's like on such a deep level, and I really appreciate that. And I really appreciate that I got a chance to get to know your work even better. And I'm really curious because to me, like, your work is quite political, and maybe you wouldn't define it in that way, or maybe you're not intentionally trying to make it political, but it really is. And even the emotion it evokes in me, I think, is
Yeah.
part of that political. So I'm curious, like, what were the events that precipitated that? What events or factors prompted your work, which is, yeah, like, to become more political, let's say. And if you had some kind of a transformation that you experienced between a time when your work was less political to when it was more or political. Yeah, like, yeah.
I think I really would describe my work as non-political, and it took me some time to realize that, you know what, Nayiri, you are actually writing a little bit about politics even when you don't want to, because I always highlight I'm interested in stories, just human stories, individual stories, one person. I'm really interested in that one woman that I met at church, like at churchyard that day, and that I just assumed because she had a wig on and she was very faint, I assumed she was doing treatment. I'm interested in her story. I'm interested in my niece's story. So just I zoom in on the individual, but I think it was after August 4th that I realized that even when you're at home, sitting at home, because my husband and I, we were at home when the explosions happened. So even when you're at home sitting and, you're minding your own business, these things happen. Explosions happen and they invade your home. So you can distance yourself from all of these, from politics, but it still happens. It invades you in the safest place. And by the way, I actually started to write again after August 4th because I was too involved in teaching, and I thought, you know what, it's difficult to be a writer. Writers struggle, and it's just, but I think after August 4th, I realized that life is too short not to do what I love. So even if whatever happens tomorrow, at least I know that for today I wrote. I mean, for the time that I have on this earth, I want to write. And then it became too painful not to write, this channel of expression. So when you bottle it up, I think, I don't know what it is with writing, when you kind of halt it and you want to write, it becomes painful. So not writing becomes painful. I think after August 4th, yeah, even if I write about people, if I write about, sometimes I even write about my dogs. but even when I write about my dogs, there's like that undertone that I write about politics in a way, or some kind of sarcasm, some kind of, you know. Um, when I think back to August 4th, I was teaching at a different university closer to our home, and it's very close to a well-known hospital here in Beirut. It's called Hospital Room or Hospital Saint George. And one of our students who had just graduated as a nurse 2 years prior to that, she was killed on the day. She's also Armenian. She was a beautiful, beautiful, very polite, very talented young nurse who had so many dreams, so many aspirations, and who was just going on her normal daily routine. So because she was so conscientious, she arrived to her duty at 6, so earlier than when her shift starts. And the minute she entered the hospital, the explosions happened and she was killed. And her sister was able to identify her by her tennis shoes. So this is when I think, yeah, the personal is political. I mean, how could I just not think, feel, grieve, resist, be angry, just, feel rage about something like that? And Jessica is just one example, unfortunately, of so many people, 250 people from different religions, different ethnicities. Some were migrant workers here, some were just walking, some were working. So many of these people, they each have their own story. And yeah, I think after August 4th, after the hyperinflation also, I just felt that that's it. And I want to read something about pine nuts. So we lighten the mood a bit. But it's actually how I was in the supermarket. It's one of my pieces. It's called The Luxury of Pine Nuts. And how I wanted to buy pine nuts. In Arabic, they're called snowbar or snowbar. And I realized that they're really, really very expensive. So here it goes. Remembering that we have a friend coming over, I find myself in front of the rifa'i stand and enjoy the enticing smell of mixed nuts. Well, at least smelling them is for free. I remember that I have not bought walnuts, nuts, or pine nuts for a while. How much is the snowbud pine nuts? I ask. 1 kilo, I ask the lady at the stand. She inspects me from head to toe and then writes something on a small piece of paper. She asks me again, 1 kilo? And I wonder if this is like a treasure hunt that we are playing. Then, recomposing her stature, she says, 2? 2. So I look at her and I say, 2 what? Why don't you just write the prices as you used to? I hear myself speaking louder, feeling agitated. The prices change every day, sometimes every hour. Silence. Million. Silence. 2 million. This was, by the way, 3 years ago. Now you can't buy anything with 2 million. Like literally nothing. Now you can probably buy just 2, 3 grocery items with 2 million. So pine nuts. I want to laugh out loud. I want to laugh out loud and then hide in one corner because maybe pretend I'm Sleeping Beauty and then wake up when all of this is over. The exploitation, the theft, the hyperinflation, and the corruption. I want to run all the way back to the 80s and tell my mom that I know now why she hid those nuts in the freezer and why she pretended that they were not ours. Yes, our money sits in the banks while we run around like zombies in comatose states trying to find our way to make extra income and fresh dollars because anything else does not matter. So yeah, that was I think also part of the fact that again, you know, you're minding your own business, you're going to work, you're a good citizen, you're not breaking any laws, but then all of a sudden the basic things that you need, you cannot afford them. But it's not because you're not working. You're working really hard, you're working harder, you're keeping two jobs, but you cannot afford them because, you know, of the hyperinflation and because of what happened with the banks. So, yeah, so when I guess when you see that it's there, the political is there, this is happening, you know, Jessica has been murdered, so many others like Jessica, and it is because of a corrupt system, and no one, not even one person in the ruling class has expressed any kind of responsibility, accountability, you name it, nothing. So, yeah, I mean, imagine what that means to the families. There's no closure. It's just an open wound. It's an open wound. Yeah. And I also wanted to read, actually, since we're talking about August 4th, I wanted to read just the last part about August 4th. So, of all the wars that I have seen, August 4th destroyed the most, and in just a few moments. Of all the explosions, assassinations, bombs that I have lived through, August 4th killed simply with glass. Beirut was destroyed, ravaged, looted, and transformed in just a few moments. There is a life that we used to live before August 4th, and another one that we live now after August 4th. I'm tired of being resilient and then embracing one trauma as it prepares me for the other one. And then no one has claimed responsibility for leaving almost 3,000 tons of ammonium nitrate unattended at the port of Beirut. Accountability is a foreign concept to most Lebanese politicians. It is always someone else's fault. As the country drowns in its own stench and corruption, we still mourn the ones who left us on August 4th. Students, friends, neighbors, Armenians, Lebanese, Syrians, Filipinos. Some are still missing, unknown. Nurses, pedestrians, employees, firefighters. So, yeah, and the list continues, unfortunately. So I think, yeah, I think August 4th was actually the reason in my last piece, I wasn't actually sure that it will ever be published, the one teaching in the times of genocide, because there I don't even sugarcoat what I want to say. I just say it. You know, it is what it is. The drones are up there. I hear them all the time. So, you know, our student was killed and yeah, no sugarcoating there. So I was actually very grateful when it did get published, and I wasn't even the edits were very minimal. You know, I thought, oh, they're gonna ask me to, you know, leave out this part, that part, cut out certain things that may be problematic for some people. Nothing of the sort. So yeah, at least good things.
Yeah, thank you for ending on that good note. And I have to say that when I read Teaching in the Times of Genocide, it was right after I had taught a class.
Oh,
And I cried reading it. And really I everyone should go out and read that piece as well as everything else that Nayiri has written I wanna, we wanna thank you, Nayiri, for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It was wonderful to speak to you, to speak to Milena. Thank you so much for this space.
Thank you for being here.
And I will on the YouTube page where this video appears, I will share the links to all of the pieces, well, except the unpublished one, which hopefully will be published soon, that Nayiri read from today. And again, please like and subscribe to this channel, and also comment, tell us what you thought. We would love to hear from all of you. Thank you.
Actually, our next episode, you touched a bit on it, Nayiri, we didn't tell you about it, but about this topic of trauma and PTSD, the post in it, and how in some contexts, in so many contexts, there is no post, it's just endless, continuous trauma. But yeah, it could be interesting.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah, so we're excited about that.
I'll definitely watch it.
That will air on May 2nd.
So yes, tuned. So take care.
Thank you. Thank you, Nayiri, again. Thank you to all the listeners. Bye, everyone.
Bye.